what's going on here is our ability to share the story of ASEA is increasing at huge levels. The technology that we can use to share simple tools and messages with people that will pique interest and curiosity so they can find out that this truly is life-changing products, life-changing culture, and life-changing opportunity. We sat in the back there as we watched these presentations played out. And by the way, let's give a round of applause to these stories that have been shared this morning. Absolutely amazing. I find the stories are so powerful, and I'm so thankful for the way these messages have been shared today, because what they're doing is touching the heart and teaching us that this is not about us. It's not about you. It's about other people. It's about going out and finding people that need help. And I got to tell you, this is my mission. Don't you think about your family and the people you love as your mission? We talk about a corporate mission, and I'm going to go deep on our corporate mission today, but this is my why, and ultimately you guys are my why. I am so inspired by you. I'm so humbled to participate in this with you. This is not Vertus's, and this is not mine. This is ours. And you guys make this company what it is. I feel unspeakably humbled to be associated with every one of you. One of the most beautiful things that's happening with ASEA is we're moving around the world. And I want to thank those of you that have traveled such long distances to be here with us in Las Vegas. I particularly want to thank our friends from Asia who have most recently joined the company. I feel so thankful to be meeting people from different countries and cultures around the world. And what I'm learning is we are not different people. We're the same. And I'm going to talk about this today. We need to be careful with how we treat each other. We need to be careful with this beautiful culture and protect it and preserve it. And the way we preserve it is by paying close attention to our mission statement, which is what I want to talk about today. I want to talk to you about the motive, the internal motive, the drive of mission, of cause. Now, as I talk about this, I want you to realize that mission represents, to quote Alan, and by the way, Alan, I have to get some credit for introducing you to the concept of a noble purpose. Right? Am I right? Alan has taken that and plagiarized me with his own name. But it's true. Your mission must be your noble purpose. It has to be your reason for being. It must be the answer to why you exist. Now, to give you some sense of what I mean by this, last year I talked about the intersection of two things, the personal with the professional. Vertus worked in craft, where the professional rarely was invited into the realms of the personal. We live in a world where we can joyfully intersect the personal with the professional. If you haven't heard and felt that today, listening to the stories on the stage, and sensed, I got it, this is the mission. The mission lives at the intersection of both professional and personal. And isn't that a great place to be? Aren't we happy that we get to work? We have a noble purpose, a reason for being, and why we exist that is not just professional, it's also personal. And never forget that that intersection is what we're talking about. Years ago, I asked a gentleman in my prior industry why he did what he did. He was not unlike a Trish Schwinkler or a Denny or a top producer. And I went to him, I said, why do you keep doing what you're doing? I said, you've got every award you could possibly have. You have more money than you can probably spend in a given month, week, or day. Maybe for you, Denny, maybe. And then I said to this gentleman, I said, but you keep going. And I'm really inspired by that, but I'm also kind of curious, like, why are you doing this still? So when I posed this question to him, which was this notion of why do you keep doing what you do when you've already received the awards, you've already been recognized, he said, Tyler, let me teach you something. He said, when you start in something like this industry, and this is 1,000% true here, you have this feeling of saying, I gotta make it, I gotta survive. Like some of you are just trying to cover the cost of tuition for a son or daughter, or even cover your own monthly bills, and that's beautiful, and it should be. But he said in his case, once I hit that place where I was like, I got this, I'm making it okay. He goes, then I started looking around me saying, you know what? I want to compete. I want to beat somebody else. I want to run faster than somebody else. I want to walk across the stage. And he goes, and after a while, that carried me for a season. And then I started saying to myself, you know what? I want to beat my very best. I want excellence to become my new motivation. And then he looked at me and he said, but you know what's interesting, Tyler? The pinnacle of motivation, the very top, is when you do what you do for a cause. And he said, and I'm going to put this quote on the bottom of the screen. I want you to think very carefully about this. He said to me, Tyler, if I don't do my job well, someone will suffer. Think about that. Now, guys, I worked in the insurance industry. And to be sure, there were scenarios where a family might lose a father or a mother without proper insurance, and then someone would suffer. But think about our world. Think about the fact that if we don't do our jobs well, someone will suffer. So when we talk about cause, we talk about this notion of noble purpose, and we start moving our attention away from ourselves. We should always remember that cause of action absolutely must come before the course of action. So many times in business, we try to chart the course before we have charted the cause. So many times we're trying to do what Nike teaches us, just do it, go out and do it. And I say, just do what and why. Slow down. Check back in and make sure you have a cause of action that really resonates with you. Now, you've seen this great book by Simon Sinek, Start With Why. He says this about the notion of cause. He says, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So we need to investigate this, and if you said, what is our why? What's this really all about? I want to show you the why. Okay, I'm going to roll this forward into a video. I might even ask the team to play it again. This is the noble cause. This is the reason.
Son asked me to come down and join he and his family, and we went to a church gathering. And there was something going on he wanted us to be a part of. And while we were there, a young lady came up, and he introduced me to this young lady, and she started sobbing. And she had a health challenge in her family that was really severe, and she was introduced to ASEA. And because of what ASEA did, she was just grateful. So I find it hard to talk about, but that's the reason.
Every time I see that video, Alan one time mentioned this to me as well. He says, that may be the very best piece we've ever created. You know what makes it the best? It's just true. It's real. I know the first and last name of the person my dad was talking about. It was in my church on a Sunday morning. A real person, a real family. Just like the things that have been shared from the stage today. Our mission statement is to better people's lives and be a force for good in the world. That is why we exist, and that is why Virtus started this in the first place. We must never, ever forget this is the cause of action. When the cause of action, ironically, becomes making the Tahiti trip, when the cause of action pivots to making and qualifying for ascent, and we start to elevate those things greater than this statement, we are off mission and we are off purpose. Let the mission statement remind you, your success will occur in its natural order when you make the priority bettering people's lives and being a force for good in the world. To better people's lives has some rich dimensions to it. And if you've noticed and said to yourself, how has ASEA bettered your life? Or maybe I could add to that, how has ASEA bettered the life of someone you know and love? The stories today have been great evidence of that. And that's interesting because if you go back to the actual video of my dad, it's about people being impacted by products, culture, and by the opportunity. When David was speaking about owning a cafe and going at 6 a.m. and coming home at 11:30 at night, never seeing his kids, having to go to his mother's home to ask for some help. And you start to think, has ASEA bettered David's life? And you would look at the financial opportunity alone and you would say, there's no question. If you stop and consider, what communication device did my dad use to declare his why? Right here in the video I just showed to you. He used a story, didn't he? He told the story of coming down to my church, and he said, that's the reason. That's why we did this. Jerem talked about the stories we've been capturing. Did you not love the ASEA Redox video? Are you kidding me? Did you not get a clear sense of the impact? But can we give a round of applause to Ashley and Leland and Danielle for sharing their stories? I've got goosebumps right now, right this very minute. If I pulled my pant leg up, Leland, you would see goosebumps on my leg. And here's why I have goosebumps. These are real people who love their wives, who love their kids, who loved each other, who love snowboarding, who love life. And these stories are not on trial, and neither are you, ever. Jerem mentioned earlier today that we've invested. Guys, this is resources. If you can't see the oranges in the orchard that I was telling you about, every one of these stories are an orange on a tree. The tools are oranges. They're new keys on the piano. Rewrite the sheet music of your plan. Rethink it. How do I leverage the resources around me? These beautiful stories of these beautiful people become for us, right, something really, really important. They are the proof that we are living the mission to better people's lives. These are proof. Someone says to me, well, you need science to prove. Fair enough. But this isn't on trial. These are real lives, real people. 9 years into the burn, these are proof. The way I think about these stories, they're both a seed and fruit. These stories are the fruit and the seed of our mission. I want you to ponder that for a minute. They're the evidence of the impact, but they also become the seed. Maybe you've heard this concept before. You can easily count the seeds in an apple, but it's impossible to count the apples in a seed. I find myself staring at these pictures, and I say to myself, I wonder how many apples are in the seeds of these stories. I wonder how many people are going to watch this video in the coming months and years, and they're going to be planting a watermelon seed taken right out of the fruit of Leland's life. The fruit is not on trial. It is sweet to the taste, and we can touch it and feel it, but we cannot count the number of apples and fruits coming out of a single seed. Your stories are both fruit and seed, and you should share them and you should plant them, because you cannot count the impact it will have into the future. Here's a story. Coach Joey was referenced earlier, McPhillips. Joey joined the organization in January, came to Envision. He's touring the production facility and sees a guy sweeping the floor. He's trying to figure out if this is for real, right? So he says, I'm not going to listen to the guy giving me the tour. I'm going to walk over to the guy that's sweeping the floor. So he walks over to the guy sweeping the floor, and he says, hey, what's your deal? What's it like working here? And our employee in the production facility says this to him. Look, I may be the guy cleaning the floors, but those of us who work at ASEA know it's about helping the world and being part of a bigger mission. And Joey is now gold, if I'm not mistaken, Joey, and is here with us and was been referenced in other stories today, and now he's part of the mission. And I didn't make this up. This is real stuff. So the first part of this is to better people's lives. And I want you to think now about this second part of this. Be a force for good in the world. Does the world need a force for good right now? Yes. I found the most beautiful book in honor of the Dalai Lama's 80th birthday. The famed author Daniel Goleman, who wrote the book Emotional Intelligence, which was a very, very important piece of work. He's a Harvard psychologist. Goleman, who's known the Dalai Lama, the 14th Dalai Lama, for many, many years, was invited to write his vision for the world. And I absolutely love this quote from the Dalai Lama. He says, as humans equipped with marvelous intelligence, and listen to this beautiful phrase, the potential for developing a warm heart. Each and every one of us can become a force for good. I've spent the last several weeks truly researching and studying these philosophies of Buddhism, in particular Tibetan Buddhism, as taught by the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama, of course, being a title given to him, which means ocean of wisdom. And what's interesting to me about these beautiful teachings is they really center on a single leadership tool. His entire vision for the world centers on all of us developing and nurturing a skill set. And this is the skill set: genuine compassion. The Dalai Lama's vision is that each of us will become so convinced that the development of compassion in our lives is just as important as being mindful of what we eat and health and well-being. Genuine compassion, defined in a great book that I'll talk about in just a minute, is a sense of concern that arises when we are confronted with another's suffering, and we feel motivated to see that suffering relieved. I wasn't going to say this, and I'll apologize to her because she's in the back room, but this morning I was thinking about Lauren Cooper. Who a few weeks ago offered to give her kidney to the husband of her niece. Lauren's in the back right now, and I don't want to embarrass her. I'm not going to bring her to the stage. There's something noble about what she's done, but she's here 3 weeks later. And she's amazing. Lauren, I honor you. Compassion is a sense of concern that arises when we are confronted, and we are daily, with another suffering. Stanford is so convinced about the power of compassion, they've created the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education. This gentleman is named Thupten Jinpa, and Jinpa was the translator, 20 years a monk, and was the English translator for the Dalai Lama, and then went on to get a PhD. And his entire life is devoted to the teaching of compassion, and particularly tying the contemplative approaches of Eastern traditions like Buddhism to science. And they're doing this to prove the fact that just like our health and wellness depends on our food that we eat, our health and wellness scientifically can be proven to depend upon our compassion. He defines compassion in some beautiful terms. He says compassion is being scientifically proven to lighten hearts and reduce stress. Compassion is making us more patient with and understanding of ourselves and others. And when I watch the political discourse, not just in this country, but around the world, I'm so disheartened by the lack of compassion, the lack of patience we have with each other. It's also making people less lonely and afraid. I recently saw statistics, despite the connectivity of our phones, right? Supposedly, even our app is called ASEA Connect, but the connections don't happen because of this. They're finding that high school kids around the world feel more lonely than ever before. Compassion makes us less lonely and also less afraid. He also discusses how it makes us benefit in a very strange twist from other people's kindness towards us. So somehow developing the gene, if you will, of compassion helps us now to feel and appreciate and benefit from that expression back to us. So if we talk about compassion, but we don't live it, we have a challenge. In fact, the Dalai Lama's vision for the world is not so much that we sit around feeling compassion, but that we do things. This story was shared on both social media as well as in an email to me. And it's written by Maureen Hayes. And she posted, "This is why I love ASEA. It's not just the amazing products or the incredible business opportunity, but it's also the people. I need you to read the card that Maddie from customer support sent to my friend Leah. Leah had called to cancel the auto ship of her best friend who had recently died in a tragic car accident. And she says, Leah was deeply touched, and so was I. And then along with the post came a picture. There was a necklace and a handwritten note from Maddie Johnson in ASEA Associate Support. And this is what she said in her note, written to Leah Bailey. Hey, it was fun to talk to you on the phone the other day, and I'm so sorry to hear about the loss of your sidekick, Yvonne. It's always hard to lose a good friend, and I hope that your special conference on Saturday was successful. I was totally rooting for you from over here. I know nothing can replace your friend, but I hope this necklace can remind you that she's always with you, cheering you on with love. Maddie Johnson and the ASEA team. I'd like to invite Maddie to the stage, if I could. She didn't know we were going to do this. I'm not sure where they are. Where's Maddie? Is she coming? And the reason I want you to recognize Maddie, is that you in the middle, Maddie, coming up? Atta girl. Can I give you a hug? Way to go, Maddie. Stay here with me. Pretty cool. I'm pretty sure Maddie would agree with me. In a perfect world, we'd invite all of the associate support people to the stage, and here's why. Our beloved Sandy Mott has made it an absolute priority to teach and empower all of our associate support reps to live the values in action, which incidentally as an acronym is VIA. But it was VIA, Values in Action, long before we opened the products up. And they're invited to do things like Maddie did here every week. They're invited to not only do this for people in the field, like all of them, Maddie, but also for each other on the team. And you know that one of our core values is humanity, that people matter. And I just wanted to honor and recognize Maddie for being so compassionate and living the values. I know she didn't know I was going to do this to her, but thanks, Maddie, for being so incredible. Thank you. Let's do a pic. I'll walk you down here. Thanks, Maddie. So when you think about something as beautiful as a handwritten note like that, isn't that a beautiful thing? Somebody who hangs up a phone and says, gosh, I wonder what Leah's feeling. Leah just losing a friend. And then someone on our team responding to the humanity of another with compassion. That's what we're really trying to do here at ASEA. And frankly, if I could have thrown in here, I would have thrown in a picture of all of them. I want you to see this quote. The Dalai Lama says, "Don't be discouraged by the bad news we hear. In reality, it reflects a very small portion of the human story. Beneath the ugly tip of the glacier lies a vast reservoir of sensitivity and kindness, and each of us can enlarge that goodness." When Maddie sends a small note, it's this vast reservoir of kindness. And I think we need to remind ourselves of this very carefully as we think about what we're doing here. Another quote from this beautiful book says, "We long to matter, especially in the lives of those we love. We like to believe that our existence serves a purpose." There's that key word, purpose. We're meaning-seeking creatures. It's through connecting with other people and actually making a difference to others and bringing joy into their lives, that we make our own lives matter, that we bring worth and purpose to our lives. And this is the power of compassion. So as we talk about this notion of being a force for good in the world, and if you can see what I'm suggesting is connect a force for good to compassion. And don't try to think about it in the aggregate. I want you to think about it in the very concrete, small things like Maddie's note. You don't need to save the world. You simply need to respond to the humanity around you. You need to listen. You need to be listening, and you need to be aware. And if you will, there's music being played, and it's the hearts of people around you. And sometimes that music is a call for help. Sometimes that music of someone else's heart is an expression of gratitude. But we need to be a force for good in the world. Now, clearly, we're being a force for good in the world with what we're doing in the Advancing Life Foundation. And the update that you received yesterday about the Ecuador School, what we're doing to just do our small part in this world, our little small part. I sat in the back room with Champ, our beloved little dog, and they wouldn't let me feed him treats, so I was feeding him ice yesterday. She said, "You can feed him ice." And he just sat there and licked ice out of my hands, and he gave me a kiss right on the nose. And I thought, you know what, Champ? You're going to go out and be a force for good in the world. One little device at a time. Can you imagine a dog that can sniff out some chemical on a device? We don't need to worry about how big of an impact we're making. We just need to start making small, incremental impacts. I believe we are being a force for good in that regard. I hope that you would agree with me that our efforts to teach the ASEA ethos around the world and to share principles and simple messages about really what I like to think of as how we see and treat each other is a force for good in the world. The way I think about it, we grow as a company, we move into Malaysia, we just have a bigger microphone. That bigger microphone allows us to share our ethos and our core values and our spirit and our soul as a company with a new group of people. As we do it, what happens? That call that comes out from our hearts to theirs reaches the person who's ready for it and begins to bring them into a family where these kinds of principles matter. And I feel like that represents us being a force for good in the world. This quote's really interesting to me because it says a company or any organization must work actively to remind everyone why the company exists, why it was founded in the very first place, and what we believe. Guys, we've been doing this from the very first meeting we ever held. We have been saying we need to teach our ethos. That ASEA ethos, which we teach at Ethos academies around the world, right, is a simple contribution to trying to be a force for good in the world. When I think of our ethos, I think of our corporate soul and three things. One, how we see and treat ourselves. Two, how we see and treat other people. And three, how we see and treat this opportunity. If somebody said, "What do you mean when you say ASEA ethos?" I would say, I watch for how you treat yourself. You're probably a little too hard on yourself. I watch to see how you treat other people. Are you quick to forgive? Are you the type of person that is reaching out to strengthen and create greater unity and teaming, even if you don't stand to gain anything economically? That's the ethos. Are you writing a handwritten note to someone you've never met before who's doing and going through a difficult grieving process? That's the ASEA ethos. It's simply our mechanism, our microphone, to try to be a force for good in the world. Now, the reason I put the third thing up here is because I want to remind you, our job is not just to be kind which is important to ourselves and others, but it's also to open our mouth. Richard Lee in a mall, Richard Lee calling David breakfast, lunch, and dinner is part of this. It's him saying, I'm going to go out and share this because he understands it's both seed and fruit. I got to open my mouth. And when you guys stop worrying about what anybody thinks about you, and you let the compelling campaign for cause be your primary motivation, not the trip to Tahiti, it's going to be awesome, but that should not be your drive. Let the cause come out and see and treat the opportunity on the same level as how you see and treat yourself and others, and you'll be living this corporate soul. From the very beginning, we started teaching this concept of EPC. Can we turn up the house lights for just a second? This is important for me. How many of you in this room, if you'll please raise your hand and keep your hand up, have seen what this formula means and represents? Can you put your hands up? Okay, cool. Keep them up. Now take a look around the room and notice that I'm going to guess it's just under half. So I'm going to share this as a way of reminding you who have seen it, but I'm really excited to share this with those of you in this room that have never seen it. Deal? Early on in my career, I started seeing a pattern. The pattern was that someone's drive, remember the title of my remarks today are the motive of mission, the motivation, what comes from inside of you. And I could see this pattern. I could see really successful people were motivated differently. So I started looking at the relationship in motivation on a little 2-axis graph, where on the bottom I was looking at E squared, which is ego and economics, just two words that start with the letter E in English. Then I was looking at principles, and ultimately I was looking at capacity or ability. On the y-axis, and this is really, really important, especially if you've never seen this, on the y-axis I started asking myself, what is someone's motivation for and commitment to these three things? How motivated and committed is someone to their own ego, their own sense of self, or money? Economics in this case means money. How motivated and committed is someone to principles? And how motivated and committed is someone to building capacity? And here's what I found. My experience began to teach me that someone who was motivated and committed to ego, that's the sense of self, and money, at a 5 was neither good nor bad for me until I knew their commitment to the P, principles. And I would say to myself, well, just so you know, and especially for those translating, when I say principles, I'm talking about truth. I'm talking about concentrated truth. Concepts and notions like honesty, which applies in Taiwan, it applies in Tallahassee, Florida. Honesty is a principle. Humility is a principle. Kindness is a principle. Compassion, as we've discussed today, is without doubt a principle. These are true elements of life. So when you're motivated more and committed to more principle than necessarily just money, just economics, and just ego, I found this to be a very successful balance. I started referring to this as motive management, managing why you do what you do. Remember, the title of my remarks today is the motive of mission. Now, sometimes this can happen. Oh, by the way, rule number 1 is keep your ego and economic motivations and commitments beneath your motivation and commitment to principles. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay. Look at this score. Is this a good thing? Is this good when someone's ego and economic motivations start to become much greater than their commitment to truth, to principles like honesty or humility or civility or patience? And so this can be a dangerous scenario here. And I like to think of this ratio between E and P as motive management. Managing your motives. So the idea here would be keep your E under P. Now, if I add in the capacity score, what that says is how motivated and committed are you to increasing your capacity, your abilities, developing yourself, strengthening yourself, improving yourself. And that's the notion of elevating capacity. And so for me, this becomes the sum of all fear. This is the worst EPC score that you can have, in my opinion, an 828. Are there 828s in our world today? What do you think? Are there people out there that are so motivated and so committed to themselves and to money, they don't really care about truth? They don't really care about living in alignment with true principles. And oh, by the way, their C-score is high and they're pretty smart. They're capable people, but they don't care about the principles. I think we could all pull out a piece of paper and write down a few examples of this. And what I'd like to tell you is this is super dangerous. And while I certainly do think we all fall into the category of saying that person's an 828, the best thing you can do with this principle from our ethos and all of our principles that we teach is not use this as a sword, use this as a mirror. Please don't use the ethos as a sword in this company. Don't use that to attack someone else, but rather simply ask yourself, how do I reflect myself in this ethos so that you invite others to live it as well? Nothing will invite someone to attack these kinds of scores more than if you simply live them yourself. Does that make sense? Good. So keeping E squared under P and driving up C became the mantra for many years. And you know what's interesting for me is now I'm starting to look at the P. I've made it green here on this slide. And I'm saying, this is really interesting. Is it just principles that I want to motivate us? The answer is no. So with your permission, and at the very real risk of confusing you, it's now going to become E squared P cubed. And E squared P cubed is going to be not just principles, it's going to be people, and it's going to be purpose. Do you agree? Okay? If you go back and listen to Michelle or any other stories today, if you go back and watch the videos and said, I'm going to watch for principles, people, and purpose, it's going to be screaming at you. And guess what, guys? The money is going to be there. It's going to be there. You just got to stay true and motivated to the people, the purpose, and the principles, and you'll have the money. Don't let that get out of balance and miss the point. So for me, I like to think of it this way. Our motivations should absolutely always be focused on principles, people, and our core purpose. That core purpose is, in fact, our mission. That mission, right? This is a really important concept to better people's lives and to be a force for good in the world must be known. You've got to know it, you've got to own it, and you've got to energize it for all. This concept says what? You have to be the teachers of the mission. You have to go out and help people to know it, to own it, and to energize it. When you do, you're living the mission and you become the seed and the fruit. You're driving it forward. So my father-in-law taught me this. The mission must be known, it must be owned, and it must be energized by all. So when I put this mission statement up here now, and you start to think about what it really means when I say a noble purpose, a reason for being. When you talk at Simon Sinek says start with why, here is our why. This is why we exist. To better people's lives and be a force for good in the world. Guys, we have the opportunity for unmatched compassion. Who else can do this? Our products are compassion in a bottle. We're bringing something to people that's very nature is designed to both inspire and awaken hope and also, right, to breathe energy and life into other people and to reduce suffering. The word compassion, when broken apart, means to suffer with. Compassion just means to suffer with somebody. I love believing that we as an organization can be a compassionate, caring group of people who place principles, people, and purpose above the money and above our self-interests. And we have to remind ourselves of that all the time when we're throwing up pictures of Croatia and getting you all excited. And you're like, I'm going to make that trip. And I say, you want to make the trip? Double down on the mission. Double down, to use a Vegas term, on the mission. And say, my game right now is how many more people do I need to better their lives, and how much more of a force for good in the world do I need to be so that I can go reconnect to the force for good in the world in Croatia. That's how you need to be thinking about it. Okay? I'll close the session with this quote that I shared many years ago with my father, and who he used early on in the ASEA years. Every time he would close a meeting, he would say this. It's from Patanjali, and it says, when you're inspired by some great purpose, and may I remind you and even say, when you're inspired by some great mission or noble purpose, some extraordinary project, which ASEA definitely is, all of your thoughts break their bonds. Your mind starts to transcend limitations. Your consciousness expands in every direction. And you find yourself in a new, great, and wonderful world. Gosh, I feel that way about ASEA. I feel like this is a new, great, and wonderful world. And it says here at the end, dormant forces, sleeping forces, faculties, and even talents become alive. And you discover yourself to be a greater person than you ever dreamed yourself to be. This was written thousands of years ago by someone who understood probably the same contemplative consciousness of compassion that the Dalai Lama is teaching today, and that we would all do well to consider. And now he's saying it depends upon a conscious mission and great, extraordinary project and purpose. So for me, I do what I do because of you, because of that mission, and the opportunity we have to be a force for good in the world. And I remind myself of that very often, and I invite you to do the same. There is a purity that comes from it. I've told you guys earlier this year in some of the conferences, there's a quote by a gentleman by the name of Keith Yamashita, and he says, start from a pure place with equal parts empathy and aspiration. And I sat and thought about that, and I said, that is us. We started this company from a pure place. We had equal parts empathy, and we had equal parts aspiration. My dad simply said, we need to get this out to the world because if I don't do my job, someone will suffer. And so, my dear, dear friends, I invite you to know, to own, and to energize this mission. Reconnect with it. Never, ever, ever let your self-motivations, your ego, and the economics become the compelling and driving force. Consciousness, the true enlightenment that the Dalai Lama talks about, that I've been so fascinated by as I've researched it, and which has also, by the way, softened my heart to so many of our Asian visitors and friends and new family members. He says consciousness is reached, or that form of enlightenment is reached, when you cherish others beyond yourself. Let's go out and live this mission. Let's absorb anyone into this that doesn't really believe it's possible. Let's protect it. Let's be careful with it. And let's take it to the world in a way that's both surprising to them and refreshing at the same time. So when they find it, they say, this is incredible to me. This feels right to me. I hear that often at events like this. We should be doing that throughout the world and doing it in a very, very noble, calm, and confident way. This is who we are, and this is our mission. Thank you guys so much for giving some thought to what I shared today. We'll see you guys soon.